and we cannot let go for more than a few inches before stopping ourselves. We laugh in embarrassment. Finally, one student, a thin, quiet, dark haired girl whom I notice almost always wears bulky white fisherman sweaters, crosses her arms over her chest, closes her eyes, lean back, and does not flinch. Like one of those Lipton tea commercials where the model splashes into the pool. For a moment, I am sure she is going to bump on the floor. At the last instant, her assigned partner grabs her head and shoulders and yanks her up harshly. Wah, wah! Several students yell, some clap. Muri finally smiles. You see, he says to the girl. You close your eyes, that was the difference. Sometimes you cannot believe what you see. You have to believe what you feel, and if you are ever going to have other people trust you, you must feel that you can trust them too, even when you are in the dark, even when you are falling. The third Tuesday, we talk about regrets. The next Tuesday, I arrived with the normal bags of food, pasta with corn, potato salad, apple cobbler, and something else, a Sony tape recorder. I want to remember what we talk about. I told Muri I want to have your voice so I can listen to it later. When I am dead, don't say that, he laughed. Mitch, I am going to die, and sooner not later. He regarded the new machine, so big, he said, I felt intrusive, as reporters often do, and I began to think that a tape machine between two people who were supposedly friends was a foreign object, an artificial air. With all the people clamoring for his time, perhaps I was trying to take too much away from these Tuesdays. Listen, I said, picking up the recorder. We don't have to use this if it makes you uncomfortable. He stopped me, waved a finger, then hooked his glasses off his nose, letting them dangle on the string around his neck. He looked me square in the eye. Put it down, he said. I put it down, Mitch, he continued softly. Now you don't understand. I want to tell you about my life. I want to tell you before. I can't tell you anymore. His voice dropped to a whisper. I want someone to hear my story, will you? I nodded. We sat quietly for a moment, so he said, Is it turned on? Now, the truth is that tape recorder was more than nostalgia. I was losing Muri. We were all losing Muri, his family, his friends, his ex-students, his fellow professors, his pulse from the political discussion groups that he loved so much, his former dance partners, all of us. And I suppose tapes like photographs and videos are a desperate attempt to steal something from Death's suitcase. But it was also becoming clear to me through his courage, his humor, his patience, and his openness that Muri was looking at life from some very different place than anyone else I knew. A healthier place, a more sensible place, and he was about to die. If some mystical clarity of thought came when you looked death in the eye, then I knew Muri wanted to share it, and I wanted to remember it for as long as I could. The first time I saw Muri on Nightline, I wondered what regrets he had once he knew his death was imminent. Did he lament lost friends? Would he had done much differently? Selfishly, I wondered if I were in his shoes, would I be consumed with sad thoughts of all that I had missed? Would I regret the secrets I had kept hidden? When I mentioned this to Muri, he nodded. It's what everyone worries about, isn't it? What if today were my last day on earth? He studied my face and perhaps he saw an ambivalence about my own choices. I had this vision of me kneeling over at my desk one day, halfway through a story, my editor snatching the copy even as the medics carried my body away. Mitch, Muri said. I shook my head and said nothing, but Muri picked up on my hesitation. Mitch, he said, The culture doesn't encourage you to think about such things until you are about to die. We are so wrapped up with egotistical things. Career, family, having enough money, meeting the mortgage, getting a new car, fixing the radiator when it breaks. We are involved in trillions of little acts just to keep going. We don't get into the habit of standing back and looking at our lives and saying, is this all? Is this all I want? Is something missing? He paused. You need someone to probe you in that direction. It won't just happen automatically. I knew what he was saying. We all need teachers in our lives, and mine was sitting in front of me. Finally, I figured if I was to be the student, then I would be as good a student as I could be. On the plane ride home that day, I made a small list on a yellow legal pad, issues and questions that we all grapple with, from happiness to aging to having children to death. Of course, there were a million self-help books on these subjects and plenty of cable TV shows and $90 per hour consultation sessions. America had become a Persian bazaar of self-help. But there still seemed to be no clear answer. Do you take care of others or take care of your inner child? Return to traditional values or reject tradition as useless? Seek success or seek simplicity, just say no or just do it. All I knew was this. Muri, my old professor, wasn't in the self-help business. He was standing on the tracks, listening to death's locomotive whistle, and he was very clear about the important things in life. I wanted that clarity. Even every confused and tortured soul I knew wanted that clarity. Ask me anything, Muri always said. So I wrote this list: death, fear, aging, greed, marriage, family, society, forgiveness, a meaningful life. This was in my bag when I returned to West Newton for the first time, a Tuesday in late August, when the air conditioning at the Logan Airport terminal was not working, and people fanned themselves and wiped sweat angrily from their foreheads, and every face I saw looked ready to kill somebody. By the start of my senior year, I had taken so many sociology classes. I am only a few credits shy of a degree, Muri suggests. I try an honors thesis. Me, I ask, what would I write about? What interests you? He says. We bat in back and forth until we finally settle on, of all things, sports. I begin a year-long project on how football in America has become ritualistic, almost a religion, and opiate for the masses. I have no idea that this is training for my future career. I only knew it gives me another once a week session with Muri. And with this help, by spring I have a 112-page thesis, research footnoted, documented, and nearly bound in black leather. I showed it to Muri with the pride of a little leaguer rounding the bases on his first home run. Congratulations, Muri says. I grinned as he leafed through it, and I glanced around his office. The shelves of books, the hardwood floor, the throw rug, the couch. I think to myself that I have sat just about everywhere there is to sit in this room. I don't know Mitch Muri muses, adjusting his glasses as he reads. With work like this, we may have to get you back here for grad school. Yeah, right, I say. I snickered. But the idea is momentarily appealing. Part of me is scared of leaving school. Part of me wants to go desperately. Tension of opposites. I watch Muri as he reads my thesis. And I wonder what the big world will be like out there.